Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this webinar on recent cutting-edge research related to the impact of student debt. My name is Jonathan Glader. I teach at the University of California at Berkeley School of Law, and I'm a co-founder of the Student Loan Law Initiative, which is a research partnership between the Student Borrower Protection Center and law schools here at Berkeley and at the University of California, Irvine. You can learn more about that at SLLI.org. So the research you are going to hear about today delves into some of the implications of continuing student indebtedness and policy responses to student indebtedness. What were the effects of the recently terminated payment pause on borrowers? How have borrowers viewed the resumption of their student loan payment obligations? How have borrowers informed and supported each other in the face of changing and confusing information about their loans? These are tremendously important questions because this particular policy problem has not gone away. Today, we're going to hear from two scholars who completed this research that helps to answer some of these questions, Dr. Dan Collier and Dr. Adam Goldstein, who Mark Hulsman at the Student Borrower Protection Center will now introduce. So thank you all for joining us again. And Mark?
Thanks, Jonathan, and thanks everyone for joining. We're really excited to have two amazing researchers and presenters today on some really fantastic and provocative new research on student debt. I'm Mark Hulsman. I'm a fellow with the Student Borrower Protection Center. We're partners with Jonathan and team at the Student Loan Law Initiative. And as Jonathan mentioned, I have the great honor of introducing two presenters today. First, we're going to hear from Dr. Dan Collier, who is an assistant professor of higher and adult education in the Department of Leadership at the University of Memphis. Dan's also a research fellow for Davidson's College, the College Crisis Initiative, and a research fellow with the UCI Law School at the University of California via SLLI. So we're super excited to have Dan share with us findings from prolifically 3 new papers today that you can find on the Student Loan Law Initiative website, SLLI.org, all of which, all these 3 papers do an incredible job of revealing the experiences and insights of borrowers, particularly those enrolled in the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program. And just as a point of prerogative, I loved reading these papers, which is not always true for this kind of work, but Dan's papers and his previous work, frankly, on the experiences of PSLF borrowers, which you can also find on the SLLI website, give an incredibly rich description of the impacts of things like debt cancellation, the payment pause, how borrowers have navigated an incredibly flawed and broken system, and what it means to, in some cases, come out the other side debt-free, not just from a financial and how it shows up in your wallet sense, but also on measures of well-being, stress, job and life satisfaction, and so forth. So I think this Dan's research adds an incredibly needed element to this conversation, and we're thrilled to have him here to showcase his latest and greatest. So take it away, Dan. And go ahead and share your screen if you want.
Sounds good. Thank you very much for the introduction. Let's see. All right, so I just want to say off the bat, I'm a much better presenter in person, but we'll get through this one online. So I wanted to present to you, as Mark had said, on 3 papers that my team recently completed. We're calling this presentation Voices of Relief, exploring experiences and perspective of public service loan forgiveness participants. So the first thing, I get asked this question quite a bit at conferences, by policymakers, by reporters. Why did I start doing this research? Well, honestly, I was tired of reading half-assed presentations and papers and think pieces on public service loan forgiveness, really focused on the idea that doctors and lawyers were getting all the relief when nobody's talking to teachers or cops or people in higher education or other people that might be in the healthcare field but are not doctors or lawyers. So I'm just getting tired of it, and I figured I could do a better job. So I'm looking to change some of the framing here, both with a mixture of quantitative and qualitative data. And I think we're on the way to doing that. So the overall methodology here that we're using is it's an explanatory sequential mixed method approach. Basically, people take a survey, and right now we have 2,400 usable profiles from the survey. But today we're interested in the qualitative inquiry, which happens after the survey. So we have this data from the survey. We know what's going on in the policy, and we started asking questions about that. 1,500 of these people were open to an interview. We contacted 600 and ended up interviewing 124 from July to September 2023, which is right before the pause was going to end. Interviews lasted about 45 minutes each. So they're pretty robust interviews with a lot of data. We're actually drowning in data, and we have found some partners to look at other concepts that we weren't necessarily focused on because we need to get back to the mixed methods part. So today we're going to be explicitly only focusing on some portions of the qualitative inquiry. So the first paper that we have, it's called Pause and Effect. Thanks, Josh Goodman, for the help with that one. We had 104 interviews. The sample's mostly white, mostly female. The majority are married, but it's about 50-50, mostly no children. And the median age is 40 years old. So these are not new borrowers. These are people that have been around for a while. And what's interesting there, and it will loop back to this, is a lot of them do not have children. The master's degree is the most common degree in the sample, and that's pretty standard for even the wider survey sample. Same thing with median age. 61, most of the sample, 26% of the sample had 5 years plus of repayments remaining. $100,000 in federal loans were pretty common, and in one narrative that consistently gets focused on in the wider conversations is that public service loan forgiveness benefits the affluent. And yes, we do see that our sample within the survey and within the people we speak to are above median earners, but we'll talk more about why nuance is important there, because just because you might be earning a fair wage doesn't mean that in the context of everything you're doing well when we consider cost of living or median income, where you live, stuff like that. So let's talk about what people told us about the pause. The pause eased individuals' mental distress. As you can see here, Sam, it's been a game changer, and there's a whole lot more quotes in the paper, so please go look at that. I'm just pulling out a few of them just to make a point here. Sam talked about how they were grinding their teeth down to the gums. The stress was so much for a lot of these individuals that our survey data show that about 20% of them had suicidal ideation, which is much higher than the national average, much higher for American adults. So the pause really eased this mental distress. And part of the easing of the mental distress is it reduced financial stress, right? It helped people with savings. There was a lot of people that claimed that they were living paycheck to paycheck. There were a lot of people that were talking about not being able to afford basic needs or having to rely on credit cards just to bridge those gaps. And again, it's really hard to figure out who these people are, even with a lot of data, because there's a lot of variables that go on with these kinds of decisions, right? It assisted older borrowers with being able to start saving for retirement beyond just that which your employer provided. Now, these people are starting retirement savings like Golda at 60, which is a little late. I mean, not to diminish Golda, but it's a little late. It's hard to build that up for that kind of for retirement. So there's going to be problems in the long run, and we see that in some of the data that has come out in the recent decades about things that we're going to have to deal with for this generation of borrower. Now, we also found that during the pause, the savings component helped with buying durable goods. Some people bought houses. Some people upgraded their houses. Others did not buy houses, but bought newer cars. And I'm not talking like BMWs, I'm talking Civics. They could not buy newer cars. They needed cars and just simply couldn't do it. And then importantly, like I said, we'll come back to this majority childless part. During the pause, people started making different family planning decisions here. Some people were able to catch up because we know that childcare costs are high. So they were able to better afford their childcare costs. Some people even had their first or second child because they felt comfortable in that financial situation. So the pause, these are not new concepts to the pause. My friends at the Fed have found some of these findings as well. We're just helping support those findings with these conversations that we had with individuals. And again, I encourage you to go read the paper because there's a bunch of quotes that really hammer home how important this was to individuals. So we knew that the pause was going to end when we started talking to people. They knew about it. One of the things that I discussed in the paper is that while it eased mental distress, a lot of people, before we even asked them about resuming payments, started talking about how they were not, how that was lingering in the back of their mind. So I think that if we started talking to borrowers a year earlier, that eased mental distress might look a lot different than it was when we started talking to them, when we knew that the policy parameters were going to change. So the resuming payments, well, if the pause eased mental distress, it makes sense that resuming payments would increase mental distress. And that's the mental distress that goes with that. It's very much closely tied to financial stress. I can show you something later that shows that pathway. But for the most part, it was trying to figure out how to start resuming these payments again, even though they have lived for years in a different financial parameter. Some people decided that they were going to have to cut their spending. I've presented here a few quotes of the more severe spending cuts. Some people were going to cut into housing and food, basic needs, which, you know, Mark's focus is on this. Some people were going to have to cut out portions of their childcare costs or what their children were doing. Just 2 weeks ago, and I have this posted up on Twitter, one of the participants, Sharon, she talked about in the interview having to cut her child's guitar lessons out because they don't think they're going to afford it. Well, she emailed me a few weeks ago, and that's exactly what they did, because the guitar lessons were as much as the student loan payments. And you really hate to see that opportunities for individuals are taken away because we have decided to change, or we have decided to revert back to a different parameter. There's other things that people were planning on doing beyond spending cuts, beyond cut spending. A lot of them were going to rely on the savings that they bolstered up. Now, we're not talking a lot of savings. We're talking enough to get by for a little bit. George Costanza here, and they get to pick their own pseudonym, so that wasn't me. Talked about this a little bit. There were other people. I remember one participant in California talking about if there was an earthquake, they wouldn't have enough money to cover all of it and the student loan debt at the moment. Other people talked about getting a secondary job, as you can see from this professor at UCLA. And you know, there's a mixed bag with that, because if you get a second job, you get more income, which means you pay more. So, but this is something that they were thinking about. I don't know if they went out and did it. And then there was a factor of avoidance here. Some people just didn't want to deal with it at that time, which is understandable, because if we're talking about mental distress increasing from a point where it used to be lower and financial distress increasing with that, it's understandable that a lot of people did not want to jump back on that train and think about it in those moments. So what does this paper contribute? First of all, it aligns with the quantitative research that I know came from the Fed recently. There's not strong peer-reviewed research on the effects of the pause yet. And you know, this paper's in review. Well, a version of this, not exactly, is in review, and we're hoping to get it through peer review because I know that that's an extra, you know, point of quality control. But it's matching up with a lot of things we knew, like a lot of benefits. And, you know, again, the benefits seem to have, or a lot of benefits have seemed to have gone to higher earning individuals, but that metric alone does not help us understand how people make decisions or their financial comfort. And it's complex when we don't consider the nuance of cost of living where they're at. We have one individual, which is in the other paper. His name is Mick. He's earning $99,000 or between $90,000 and $99,000, which is good wage, right? But he lives in an area in New Jersey where the median income is $160,000. So that's not really that great for that area. The effects of resuming payments remain complex, but it seems generally hurtful. There's mixed outcomes. Some people will have to choose to forego basic needs or even just not pay back the loans. I'm going to assume a lot of these people are actually not even paying right now. They're still on the unramp. While others could cut back on luxury expenses like Netflix or going on vacations. It's hard to get a grasp of who's has to do what because there's so much variation in where people live, how people live, what their jobs afford them, and so much other things. So we're clear in the papers when we don't think that we can make a concrete declaration of who's doing what. We believe also the resumption of repayments may coincide with noticeable upticks in mental distress, and as you will see in a moment, mental distress is highly correlated with suicidal ideation, which we are seeing in our survey data. And honestly, people got real used to not having to repay these loans, and they didn't start trusting the government because I can't remember how many times the Biden administration said, hey, we're going to restart this. We're going to restart this. Well, they didn't a couple of times, so why would anybody believe them when they did, right? And that's going to be harmful in the that was harmful leading up to the actual start of payments. So that's paper one. The other ones are a little bit shorter. The second one is dubbed the forgiven. So we talked to 35 forgiven borrowers. So people who have gotten their forgiveness through either public service loan forgiveness or the temporary public service loan forgiveness adjustment. We asked, how has forgiveness changed your life? Pretty simple question. You know, we don't really know much about that. There are three core themes here. We found financial freedom, which makes sense. Career and job related freedom, which is a little more complex than it sounds. And we're back to easing mental distress. And again, I encourage you to read all these papers because these are just a few of the quotes that promote what the themes we're finding here. So we had people, again, that were living paycheck to paycheck, and that got wiped out for them. Now they're not. They're living better. It doesn't mean they're living great, but they're able to pay off things like the 3 credit cards that Miranda had used to make ends meet during months that were really lean, which were, according to Miranda, a lot. The changes of their credit score and their debt to income it changed individuals' outlooks on life. It went from, as Alberta said, generally negative to, hey, this is good. I can start living. I can start doing the things that our society promised that I could start doing with this kind of degree. There's a lot of emotional outpouring, like Sarah still, on multiple occasions during her interview, she talked about how she would just randomly think about her forgiveness and cry. If I'm remembering her correctly, she started tearing up a little bit as we were talking about it as well, because it's just so emotional. It's over a decade of people's lives to get to that point and then just have it, right? And then my favorite is Kevin talking about how the debt was always a sword Damocles hanging over his head. So we also found career and job related freedom. A lot of individuals said that public service loan forgiveness, and not just forgiven people, but again, we're just focused on forgiven here, but we talked to a lot of individuals that talked about how public service loan forgiveness was were golden handcuffs. It shackled them down to their jobs. Because of the way that the government and servicers operated public service loan forgiveness, they were afraid to go find new jobs that would likely be qualified because they were afraid they would not be qualified. And in some cases, some people actually took different jobs that were in organizations that should be qualified, but the job itself wasn't. And of course, those kinds of stories go around real quickly. So it froze a lot of people in their jobs. Now, our survey data suggests that 57% of the forgiven borrowers, and we have a couple hundred in this bid, had no intentions of leaving their jobs. But the idea that they could, the fact that it was freeing and that they had autonomy over what they could or couldn't do with their job without worrying about, well, if I go from the University of Memphis to, I don't know, Stafford University, will that also count toward public service loan forgiveness? And that's a lot of what people's math were going in their head. So again, the idea of being able to leave is the important thing here. Some did leave their jobs though. Most of the people who left their jobs just were not satisfied with their jobs. We're not satisfied with their teams, with their level of respect, really. Some people, especially in the healthcare And I think this might have something to do with COVID a little bit. Just didn't want to be in the system anymore. They wanted something completely different. So, but for the most part, like if anybody says that people leave after public service loan forgiveness, then the truth is it doesn't seem to be the case. And our survey data suggests that job satisfaction itself is not correlated with getting forgiveness at all. So again, we're gonna forgiveness eased mental distress. And you might be thinking, Dan, why do you keep focusing on mental distress here? Well, there's a good paper by Taylor about unintended consequences, economic consequences of mental distress, on undiagnosed and untreated mental distress in Indiana. And somewhere around, it costs somewhere around $10,000 per person per year in lost productivity and other indirect and direct benefits. So there's a real ROI here, if we want to frame it that way. And I know a lot of other people want to frame it just in pure money, but for me, it's, why are we putting people through this? Why are we harming people? Right? So there's people, so many stories. Like I'm reading all these again that I know that I put here, but I'm just thinking about all the other, because I did 70 of these interviews by myself. I'm just remembering all the stories of everybody just saying it was something I focused on. And the people that were new to public service loan forgiveness started realizing their debts were increasing on them. And that's something that kept them laser focused. People that were a little bit older in public service loan forgiveness start focusing more on their repayments, which also, it lowered their distress as long as everything was operating correctly. But when it came time to buy durable goods like houses, stress went right up because everything costs more, right? So it's always on the mind of these borrowers, and even the borrowers that had limited distress conveyed the fact that they're always thinking about it. And so I'm focused on mental distress because I'm concerned about these two graphs here. The first one is the uncolorful one, thinking about suicide as a binary. This is part of a regression. We're controlling for a lot of stuff, but basically, severe distress is correlated to a 33 percentage point increase in thinking about suicide. As you can see here, this is not the best picture. I tried to clean it up as much as I can. But if for individuals with severe distress, they are very, very more likely to think about suicide. Luckily, the people we talked to who had said that they had suicidal ideation, many of them did not make plans. They did not get far enough to make plans. Some of them did, some of them tried. But this is why I'm really concerned about mental distress and student loan debt, because it gets people to the level where they start thinking about it. And if you stay in this holding pattern for long enough, people start planning it. So, last paper, Informing Trust. We're focused on public service loan forgiveness online communities. We're focused primarily on two communities, the Reddit community, which while I started these interviews, had no idea actually existed. Somebody early on told me about it and said, oh, we should probably examine that with the Facebook group. Again, we found three core themes. The first is that these groups were very good at building trust. The administrators were excellent at building trust with the community. Part of the issue here is that public service loan forgiveness borrowers do not generally trust the government and servicers. And honestly, that's probably for very good reason. The government has not been a great actor, and servicers, as I think we saw last week, are not paid to help people get through the process. They're paid to keep people in the process as long as they can. So the community admins have built trusting relationships with members, and these members think that this is the information that comes within the group are of better quality. Part of that is because these administrators can speak to borrowers in ways that the government either chooses not to or cannot. I have been a critic of the way that the Biden administration chooses to communicate because, man, they are not clear about anything. But also, they trust us more than they trust the servicers as well, and again, for good reason. That trust translates into helping individuals feel more comfortable about making these informed decisions. And that goes with administrative guidance then. So people are looking for answers. Look, I watched these groups. I've watched interactions in these groups, and people have been asking, like, if I consolidate, will that kick me out of public service loan forgiveness? If I consolidate, what happens to my payments, my qualified payments? Do those still count in the same way it did? What is temporary public service loan forgiveness? All these things, right? And then, of course, excuse me, talking too long. So then, of course, what went on with CARES Act? What if I don't pay? Does that still count? And what should I do? Should I continue paying? So there's the administrators here have been very good at breaking down all these seminal questions and then pumping out the information in a way that reduces anxiety for these individuals. And they find that community, and then they see somebody like engage in something like consolidation, go, okay, that worked for them. I can do this. Or they see somebody that didn't get their forgiveness approved from Mahela, and the administrators have said, hey, this is how they communicate. Try it again. Wait for them to get back at you. The system's overloaded. So it's a helpful thing that these individuals built that trust, so then that these borrowers can find this community to where they feel comfortable in engaging in the behaviors that I know that at least the government would prefer you to engage in to help everybody out. And that brings me to the last section is these communities build a sense of belonging. And one of the biggest wins for the Biden administration, I just criticized them, but I'll give them their win, is when people post that their forgiveness happened, it's like a sense of celebration for these groups. People love it. You get to see that the temporary public service loan forgiveness and all the other fixes are working in ways that they didn't previously work. Is it optimal? That's hard to really come to an answer to, but it seems like it's working in a way that we're in these communities. It's building up confidence in these changes in this system. It really helps with connectedness. So there's probably a lot of borrowers here. And I'm sure some of these borrowers have posted their experiences on social media, and all of a sudden you get a bunch of trolls or a bunch of people that don't agree with what happened attacking you. And so sometimes, and if you're an advocate of student loan cancellation, stuff like that, it can be very isolating. So this helps these borrowers find this community, find this group, and not even on social media, right? I mean, I'm sure some of you have been around family members having this conversation, and you're just like, well, I don't believe that you deserve anything. So it's good to see this, and it's good to see these wins. So why don't we pull this all together? What's going on here? One of the things that I want to encourage is talking to more borrowers. We need more qualitative inquiry on this. I'm primarily a quantitatively focused researcher, but there's value into talking with these individuals, and we need their stories out there as much as we need the data, because the data can hide a lot of things that are going on. Just like we weren't comfortable today and saying, or in some of our papers saying, what we noticed this trend specifically for these individuals, because we can't, it's too complex. The data can also do that, but we're taught to make assumptions on the larger data with higher sample sizes, everything else, because that's the way stats are, right? And nuance really is not always integrated in a lot of the think pieces that exist that have been released. These are 3 separate papers with 3 goals, but they remain interconnected. So pausing and forgiving loan debt has obvious effects. Like we would expect to see the financial and savings and spending effects. Changes in mental distress, again, we would expect to see that, but how that changes social behavior and personal in personal health and the costs of engaging with others, we don't know what that looks like yet, and this is just one tiny step into trying to figure all that out. And then it seems like potentially, for going back to the quantitative data, we might be able to see that a forgiveness or pauses, or maybe in forgiveness, could help bolster the birth rates amongst college-educated individuals, in families. So maybe there's something there to frame forgiveness as that opportunity, because we know that the birth rate in those individuals have plummeted. And I got some research in there that that specifically shows for which groups it has. There's definitely limited, if any, trust in the government and servicers, and again, rightfully so. The Student Borrower Protection Center has been last couple of weeks showing you why borrowers have limited trust in at least the servicers, if not the government. And neither of these entities could communicate in ways that borrowers have confidence in them on average. I mean, we didn't find all bad things about Mohelo when we asked how the transition was going, but there's always this tone of, I don't understand what they're saying to me. Why can't they just tell me what to do in an easy to way, understand thing? But even if they did, since there's no trust, it's not like people are going to go do that, right? And then the community aspect is very important. And then, as I said, one small step towards understanding things across these papers. We have a very limited understanding of what the effects of turning on the pause or turning the pause off was. Our work suggests that people got real used to not paying it, and they made decisions in a time frame where they didn't have to. And now somebody could say, well, permanent income hypothesis, they should have been looking forward. But we also know that most people just live in the moment where they're at because that's what they have to plan for. Most people are surviving. So it's not well understood what's going on with individuals. And maybe we can focus on individuals who had children during the pandemic and the pause to see what's going on with them. So thinking more widely, yes, this is public service loan forgiveness focused. However, my team and I believe that these themes would translate to borrowers in IDR, but the intensity would be different. So public service loan forgiveness borrowers have their debts forgiven and at least half the time. And I did put in theory because the program has not been running correctly for a long time. But we think that you would see similar trends, but I think those in IDR would have increased mental distress, would have when repayments started, or and maybe they didn't make similar decisions during the pause. But I think we'll see that. A common narrative for public service loan forgiveness in IDR people is, well, they're paid well, they should be fine, or they're on income driven repayment and they should be fine. This doesn't seem to be true. And if you go look at our at least two of the papers, Pause and Effect and W on Forgiven, sorry, Metallica. It seems like there's a lot of nuance in that. There's a lot of nuance with how big your family is, where do you live, what are you actually earning now? And and to remind you, we're capturing people in the moment. And the sample, the average age of the sample is 40. They're not 20. Like, these are people that are well into their careers, so they should be earning a little bit better with their degrees. And but that doesn't erase all the stress that got them up to this point. And their debts have experienced negative amortization. So when you see that and you see this mountain of debt, there's just no way out. So you combine the mental stress with this financial stress that has been long term. Of course, you might have some different feelings about things and say, some of my friends who only look at the earnings data, it's like, you should be fine. And one other question that I consistently get asked when I present on this information in academic circles, this is the first time I presented this out in the public, is this a true experience or just their perceived experience? And my response is always, this is their lived experience. It's true to them. If we pull out a giant survey with a good sample size and everything else, and we control for whatever we can control for, which sometimes is hard to throw a lot of controls in, maybe we don't see this distress in the ways that we could measure it that way. But they're telling us that this is a problem. Now, is this the same kind of a problem as a high school graduate who is struggling to find a job? No, it definitely isn't. But it is still a problem that we need to focus in on that and see how we can either help individuals see that there's a light at the end of the tunnel road, or get them help because they're still struggling. And if it means financial help, fine. If it means mental distress supports, fine, because it's still a problem. So, and one thing I just want to leave you with, you all probably already know this, there's limited trust in the system, and the government's not going to fix that trust, but maybe some communities could. So, to borrowers, if you're interested in going into these communities, vet these communities. Not all communities are the same. I mean, we just did work on 2 communities. They're pretty robust communities. And we have some guidance in our paper for you to think about if you want to get become part of the community as either a lurker or somebody who's a little more active. We're almost done. So what's next? This is our first year of work. It's a planned 3-year project. We are currently updating the Jubilee and Jubilation paper that was first released by the Student Borough Protection Center in November 2022. My co-author and co-PI, Frederick Ingram, has a paper called The Price is Never Right, and that focuses on the qualitative inquiry with our African-American and Black borrowers, who we uniquely found have similar mental distress, financial stress as white borrowers. So we wanted to know why that was, given that we think there's a lot more barriers for those individuals and how they framed it. So if you want to talk about that, I can get you in contact with Frederick. Hard to concentrate, which is a mixed methods structural equation modeling. I told you I'd get back at this. So we see that financial stress, payments balances go through financial stress, which go through well-being. The driver here seems to be financial stress and everything flowing into that go to subjective well-being. Not going to get too far into the weeds on that one, but you and I, we can have a conversation if you want to email me on that. And then my graduate assistant is leading a paper on individuals who are waiting on a forgiveness decision, which is going to be very important given what the Student Borrower Protection Center found with Mohela, keeping people in that liminal zone between payments and getting their forgiveness. Because we found that group was most prone to have suicidal ideation, and that group was most prone to actually planning it out based on our conversation. So we don't have the stats to go with it, but when we talk to them, have plans on it, because uncertainty drives mental distress. And you leave people in that zone for too long, that's what they think about. That's what they're focused on. So of course, they're going to start moving in directions that are not healthy. Year 2, we're going to capture some match data, and then we're going to open up to anybody on income-driven repayment. We are capturing food security data as well, and we're still seeking additional funding to support the team. So if anybody has any leads or we want to talk about this and what we plan on doing next, hit me up. Which is hit me up. So if anybody wants to talk, I'm easy to find. You can find me at the University of Memphis. You can find me on Twitter, where I run my mouth consistently. Or you can find me on Blue Sky, where I'm starting to run my mouth a little bit. So that's all I got.
Thanks, Dan. Really appreciate the comprehensive overview of what you found. I especially appreciate titling one paper after as a play on a Metallica song. I think you're about the only academic I know who can pull that off. So we super appreciate that. We're going to go quickly to our next presenter, which is Dr. Adam Goldstein, who is an associate professor of sociology and public affairs at the Department of Sociology and the School for Public and International Affairs at Princeton University, and an SLLI grantee. And Adam's going to share some research, I think very, very timely and connected with what Dan's team found around the experiences of borrowers, particularly around dealing with negative amortization and runaway balances. Adam and his co-author, Charlie Eaton, have done incredible work over the past several years, adding to the research literature around the profound, impacts and potential impacts of debt cancellation on historically marginalized households and certain populations. And Adam's going to share with us some initial findings, specifically around borrowers' experiences with income-driven repayment and the ways that the phenomenon of runaway balances shows up across different populations. So, Adam, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you. Let's see. Okay, good. Can everyone see this? All right. So thank you for the invitation to have us here. I'm going to be pretty brief. This is honestly a sort of narrower inquiry than the sort of multifaceted presentation that Dan just gave us. We're really focused on a very particular set of dynamics here about the intersection between processes of negative amortization among borrowers and IDR, specifically what we might now think of as legacy IDR, the pre-2023 IDR policies. And I'll sort of talk a little bit about the motivation for why we're interested in this particular connection. So just generally, part of the motivation for this, and this is sort of a little more academic, is an interest in the social stratification of risks in a debt-funded higher education system, or for that matter, debt sort of individualized social welfare system in the United States. And this is sort of part of the broader context for all this. And we talk about social stratification of what we essentially mean for those who don't use this jargon is differences or disparities across social groups, be they based on socioeconomic status, race, gender, etc. And so one of the ways that this social stratification and the consequences of debt-funded education, higher education, have manifested themselves is these really stark patterns of disparate negative amortization that we've seen documented. I'll show you some of that in a second. And you want to focus, as I said, on the intersection between those processes and income-based repayment plans. In other words, what role has IDR played in contributing to these patterns? And the reason we sort of want to think about this is income-driven repayment has really been the primary policy response that's intended to buffer borrowers from the repercussions of debt burdens. And it's done so primarily by focusing on monthly payment affordability, right? Tying payments to monthly payment amounts to income levels. One of the somewhat less well-studied aspects of this, however, is that IDR allows for negative amortization, that is, for debt balances to grow when those calculated monthly payments are less than accrued interest in a given month. And so the broader sort of policy implication for all of this, we think, is that understanding this, we might call the legacy effects of past IDR policies on borrowers' current balances, has implications for how we think about what sorts of adjustments might be made in the rulemaking process to deal with the fact that many borrowers who've been making payments on time, and following the dictates of the policy, have seen their balances continue to grow over a long period of time. So, by way of background, I think it's pretty well established at this point that there is widespread, there's been a widespread negative amortization among student loan borrowers in the U.S., and that these patterns exhibit stark disparities across socioeconomic status, gender, and race. So here I'm just showing some nice graphics that were produced by Laura Beamer and Marshall Steinbaum in a New York Times sort of op-ed piece of last year. They also have some reports on this. They're not the only ones. This is all pretty well documented. What we see is, if we're talking about negative amortization trajectories, we're talking typically about the percentage of the original balance owed at a given later point in time, and how these patterns, at least the average trajectories, vary across social groups here. And this sort of renders that picture quite starkly. Now, this is looking at the overall population. What we're interested in this paper is actually a much more specific subpopulation of borrowers who are in income-driven repayment. Now, sort of a second point of background here is that income-driven repayment plans have very often failed to work as designed. And again, I think this is well known, well established. Student Borrower Protection Center has done a lot of work on this. Our team has a prior paper on precisely these problems of implementation in IDR, and that all the administrative hurdles and burdens arise in that process that essentially create access barriers and produce socioeconomic disparities in both take-up but also retention among potential beneficiaries of IDR. That is to say, it's difficult to get in and it's difficult to stay in given all of the sort of bureaucratic hoops through which one must jump. And one consequence of this, again, I think it's been reasonably well documented, is phenomena such as forbearance traps, non-credited payments, when borrowers think that they're enrolled in IDR and are not, that essentially contribute to capitalized interest, and then this sort of growing spiral where the debt levels continue to grow despite borrowers making payments. So this is sort of depiction in which the connection between IDR and negative amortization is a bug, right? It's one in which it's the failure to implement IDR properly that contributes to negative amortization and disparities therein. But we want to actually look at a sort of slightly different question. We're sort of thinking, what about under the best case scenario when the policy works as designed? That is, when borrowers are able to get into IDR and stay in IDR, within that subpopulation, it's a selective subpopulation, but within that subpopulation, how much social stratification do we see being produced in these amortization trajectories? And so one way to think about this is we're sort of trying to parcel out the design effect of IDR from the sort of all the poor implementation. And so empirically, then, what we're going to do is focus on a restricted subsample of borrowers. Lost my screen here. Restricted subsample of borrowers who, you can say, quote unquote, did everything right and managed to remain enrolled in IDR. And then we're going to track the socioeconomic, gender, and, well, for the purposes of this presentation, just socioeconomic and gender differences in their balance ratio trajectories from their initial point of enrollment onwards. So we're not looking at their balances relative to when they first began repayment, but their balances relative to when they first enrolled in IDR. And we are actually also studying racial stratification. We are just getting the data we need to do that properly right now, so we don't have that ready to present yet. And for this analysis, we're using data from the University of California Consumer Credit Panel. So just to sort of set the baseline here, if we look at just the absolute amounts owed at the time of initial IDR enrollment by income level, which we're here just very coarsely distinguishing above and below median income levels, and by gender, we see actually, is that the amounts owed at this initial time point vary a little bit, but not starkly. And these are box plots. So the median line, the white line in the middle is the median. The black box shows the interquartile range, which is the 25th to 75th percentile. And then the bars show those up to 1.5 standard deviations above that interquartile range. And so, you can think of this as for each subgroup, each group here, each gender income group, you can sort of think about this as the distribution with the white line in the middle showing the central tendency. Again, what we see here, though, is that there's not stark disparities at the initial baseline. It's actually quite similar. What happens, however, over time is quite striking. So if we then look at how these distributional patterns evolve, so here we're comparing above median men and above median women. A couple key patterns arise. One is that for all groups over time, we see this sort of fanning pattern, right? Which makes sense. People have varying trajectories over time, right? And so if you're at a higher point here in this, that means you've negatively amortized. So higher levels actually mean negative amortization, a higher percentage of the balance still owed. And what we see in sort of the overall height of these bars and whiskers is the dispersion over time within groups. And the degree of dispersion we can think of as being an indicator of risk, right? So it's, we can show this formally using, variance function regressions or whatever, but for the purposes of this presentation, we're going to use the squint method, which is to say, if you look closely, you see that the dispersion over time among women is much greater, which is the risks of negative amortization tend to be greater among women. The levels also tend to be slightly greater. It's not quite as evident graphically, but it's actually quite significant. And again, we see the same thing if we look at then above median income men and women, although here it's a little less distinctive than the below median group. The slides I just showed you actually don't do a very good job of rendering the variations by socioeconomic status. So here we're just plotting the mean post-enrollment trajectory. So instead of showing you these box plots with the distribution, this is just the mean estimate for each income quintile. And the legend isn't very good, but really what you see here is that among those who are in IDR and stay in IDR, it's really only those who live in census blocks that are within that are in the top 20% of the national income distribution who are actually experiencing, who are paying off their balances at a greater rate than those balances are growing. Now, this is not the top quintile of borrowers. This is like borrowers who are in the top quintile of the national residential income distribution. I can talk more about that subtle distinction there. But again, we see here a stark disparity within even this subpopulation who are managing to stay in IDR. So what do we see from this rather brief set of, I think, suggestive but hardly definitive descriptive plots? A couple of things. Well, one is that pre-IDR, pre-2023 IDR generated really disproportionate levels of risk, if we think about risk of negative amortization for lower income and female borrowers. And that's even when they remained continuously enrolled in the program. So again, this is the sort of effect of IDR on disparate negative amortization that's due to the design of the program as opposed to its poor implementation. Now, in some ways, this is like, I think, if you think about it, not especially surprising. We know that women tend to have lower income trajectories, and that's going to be at a disadvantage when it comes to paying off loan balances. But I think it also foregrounds how these legacies of previous repayment design have helped produce the burdens that we see, the disparities in debt balances that we see in the present. And what we're sort of hoping for here, by way of sort of public engagement, is to help build the case for a more generous retroactive balance adjustment. As I think most people on this call know, the 2023 SAVE plans and the practice of negative amortization for IDR enrollees. But that was, of course, not the case for all of these borrowers who've lived much of their repayment career under the old system and are continue to face the elevated balances that have come with that. So that's it from me. I don't know if we have time. I would love to actually hear from Mike and Mark and other folks from the Student Borrower Protection Center about any updates on the policy front that might have bearing on this work. I'm not as good at keeping up with that as you all are, but that's where we are now with this.
Thanks, Adam. And that is actually a wonderful segue. First of all, I want to thank Adam and obviously Dan for sharing what I think is sort of fascinating research. But as Adam alluded to, incredibly timely. These are live issues that the Biden administration and lawmakers are specifically working to address. Adam mentioned the proposed SAVE plan, which for borrowers moving forward does acknowledge the deep pain that negative amortization and runaway balances can cause, among other things. But obviously, sort of we have tens of millions of borrowers who we know have experienced hardship over decades and deserve relief. But there's also sort of the effort to provide widespread debt relief through the rulemaking process and that the Biden administration has proposed over the past couple of weeks. So we'll note that that's currently open for public comment. I am going to introduce very quickly Mike Pierce from SBPC, who might want to bring us home and offer some words on that process and what's happening moving forward. But just wanted to thank Dan and Adam for their contribution and obviously their co-authors as well. So Mike, what you got?
Thanks. I will repeat Mark's thanks to both of our guests here today. This is incredibly timely and high impact research. I mostly just want to leave with a call to action for the folks that are on this call and directly linking this work to this opportunity for public comments related to the set of proposed debt relief plans that the president is using the rulemaking process to put in place. The first of these categories in particular is directly related to Adam's work, Adam and Charlie's work. There is a proposal to provide some amount of debt relief to basically bring people back to what they borrowed for folks that are in the system and have been caught in this hamster wheel, making payments but not making progress for a long period of time. There are ways to strengthen the policy. There's certainly opportunities to leverage this research to help the Biden administration write a better rule in the end. But for borrowers that are going to enroll in SAVE or have enrolled in SAVE, this particular policy proposes wiping away all of their unpaid interest and bringing their loan balance back to what they first borrowed. That doesn't do anything for folks that have been making payments this whole time and would like to have seen some progress towards debt cancellation instead of just getting back to zero. Certainly there's ways that it is stronger, but it does, the government's projections are that this will reach as many as 30 million people, that the typical borrower will receive about $5,000 worth of debt relief. Many people will receive many, many multiples of that, depending on how far behind they are on their loans. And obviously, because of SAVE, people are making progress. They're getting some credit for their progress towards debt cancellation, ultimately after 10 or 20 or 25 years, depending on their circumstances. So these are all very complicated programs. Tune in for lots more from us on this and this comment opportunity. Also, if you have student debt and you're just trying to make heads or tails of what your current situation is, please check out cancelmystudentdebt.org. That is a project that we run in partnership with a number of large labor unions to provide actionable information about all of these very complicated programs to help people get out of debt themselves. That's cancelmystudentdebt.org. And once again, thank you all. I will add one more closing thought here, which is we could not do any of this without our partners at the Student Loan Law Initiative at the University of California, Jonathan, who you heard from earlier, and my friend Dale Jimenez, who could not be on today, but runs SLLI at UC Irvine Law School. We are always looking for research partners. We are always looking for good ideas. We are here to help plug in researchers in the policymaking process. So if you are a researcher tuning in here, please reach out to us. You can also reach out to me directly. It's mike@protectborrowers.org. Check us out at SLLI.org. We have these wonderful papers from Dan and his team. We will be able to hopefully share some slides from Adam and Charlie. Just stay tuned for more from us, and please stay engaged. Thank you so much. Thanks to our presenters, and have a wonderful day.